Hey guys, Christoph the Polish Geek, and welcome to another movie review, more like a retro review, because after Tron Ares I decided to also do a retro review of Tron Legacy, all the way from 2010. And first I have to say is that it's certainly much better than Tron Ares. There's no doubt about that that goes without saying that it's much better than Tron Ares, because yes, before I saw Tron Ares, I did want to refresh my memory and rewatch the first two Tron movies just to see if they hold up well, because the original 80s movie is a quite good movie actually from the 80s. I mean, it wasn't particularly liked as it came out, but then it developed a cult following, and I thought and still think that same thing seems to be happening with Tron Legacy, because Tron Legacy also received a very mixed reception from critics and audiences, and especially fans of the 80s weren't particularly fond of the movie, and neither were the critics. The general consensus was that beautiful visuals and world building, but a pretty generic story with really generic characters. That seemed to be basically the consensus for Tron Legacy, but now I think it's also seemingly developing a cult following, probably from people who saw it in 2010 and loved it a lot, and now they're grown up and love it due to nostalgia. I could be considered one of them, because yes, I did see Tron Legacy in cinema back when it came out, actually, 2010. I was like 15, 16, yeah, probably 16, because the movie came out in 2010 and I was born in 1994, so yeah, probably I was likely 16, but yes, I remember seeing it then in theaters. Actually, that was my first experience with Tron movie, and ended up really loving it a lot. And then I also rewatched back then it was watched for the first time, watched the original Tron from the 80s, and back then I thought Tron Legacy was better, because my issue with Tron was that it was such a slow pace, but now upon rewatching them both, I actually think the original 80s Tron is a better movie, but that's ultimately a different story. But does Tron Legacy hold up though? As much as I think that the original Tron is better, does that mean Tron Legacy is bad? Is it still a good movie? And overall I say yes. It's still quite a good, entertaining action sci-fi movie. Is it as good as I remember it? No, because back in 2010 I was going as far as to say I loved the movie a lot. Now I'll just say that I did quite like it and was pretty entertained by it, but I can't say it's particularly a great or groundbreaking movie. It's a very good sequel and very worthy addition to the original 80s movie, but again, I actually see what the critics are saying, that ultimately the plot is pretty generic, as are the characters. I mean, they're certainly much better from the characters in Tron Ares, but admittedly it's probably not a high bar to clear. And the first thing I want to talk about that actually the movie does very well is that the visuals and the world building are actually pretty good. I love this newer digital world that's kind of different from the digital world in the 80s, because the digital world in the 80s was kind of this like old technology style, whereas in Tron Legacy it's kind of a newer technology, which makes perfect sense actually to adjust it more to the modern technology. I mean, modern of the time, but you know what I mean. And so that's quite good, and I love also the way the digital world looks like. It totally feels like a digital world. In contrast, as I said, to Tron Ares, where digital world felt more like some generic futuristic sci-fi world, but here it truly feels like a digital world. It truly feels like basically you went inside a computer, and I really loved it. And the visuals, as I said, are amazing, as are the action scenes. So yes, in terms of world building, visuals, and action, I think Tron Legacy simply exceeds in this case. But where it sadly kind of falls off is the story and the characters. Although I won't go as far as say the story is bad. I mean, it's not bad, it's a cliche story. Like, I mean, the father goes missing and the son finds his father in the digital world, and then there's a strong father-son bond, and then the father ends up sacrificing himself to save his son, and there is of course an evil main villain who has a personal history with the father. Yes, the story is as generic as they come, but sometimes it's not necessarily a bad thing, because those are type of movies that you often actually watch for visuals and action scenes, and not necessarily for some incredible storytelling. But also, and I often say it on my channel, that a key to a generic story to make a movie awesome is likable and awesome characters. And does exceed here, and I think this is the biggest flaw of the movie. I won't go as far as to say the characters are completely unlikable and you can be invested in their story, and that's what keeps the movie from being engaging and entertaining enough for me, but at the same time I also can't say the characters are particularly great and likable, and there's certainly almost no character development whatsoever. In fact, I'm gonna say that almost every character by the end of the movie is pretty much feels like they were at the same spot as they started the movie. So yes, no character development whatsoever. It just feels like, as I said, as the characters are pretty much at the same space development-wise as they were in the beginning of the movie. So overall, I think that this is what the movie will strongly benefit, to make characters a lot more likable and compelling and more character development. Again, not saying the characters are bad. Actually, as I said, they are interesting and not one-dimensional enough to make you interested and engage in their storyline and care about what happens to them, but at the same time, not the type of characters that you'd ideally want to watch constantly, that you'd want to relate to and that you just want more of. That's the best way I can describe the characters. Interesting enough to keep you engaged in their character arcs as you're watching the movie, but not type of memorable characters that will just like stay in your memory for a long time. That's the best way I would describe the characters in Tron Legacy. And I also think that Clue is a quite good villain, and I like how he's kind of different from Master Control Program in the original Tron, because Master Control Program was basically almost felt like this almost Lovecraftian, I mean digital Lovecraftian cosmic digital threat actually, that wanted to first take over the whole digital world and then basically control humanity. That's how I describe Master Control Program. Basically, as I said, basically like digital Lovecraftian entity, whereas Clue feels more like this evil overlord, this program originally created for good purposes but then gone rogue and then basically becoming an evil overlord of the digital world and creating this dictatorial utopia. And I quite like that. I like how, as I said, Clue is instead of basically reusing a similar type of villain of Master Control Program, they're creating something new. Yep, good credit to that. So overall, is Tron Legacy as good as I remember it? And I say nope, it's not. In fact, because as I said, back in 2010 when I saw it in cinema, I very much loved the movie and was so like amazed by it and was saying after I left the theater, wow, such an amazing movie. But that's really not the feeling I have by rewatching it now. I mean, I still will think it's a quite good and entertaining movie, and I was very much entertained as I was watching it, but I didn't have this feeling of a great movie as I did back in 2016. So, because as I said, the visuals, action, and the world building are still fantastic, and the characters are interesting enough to keep you engaged in their story and character arc, but at the same time you can't really say they're particularly memorable, that they will stay in your head for a long time after finishing the movie. And the story is as generic as they come, and that in itself wouldn't be a problem if the characters were better written. Again, they're not terrible characters, but I wouldn't call them particularly great characters either. And the key to a generic story to make it still great, I think, is great, amazing characters, which characters of Tron Legacy are not that. Again, they're not bad characters, but I wouldn't go as far as to say they're great characters either. So, another thing that I think Tron Legacy does well is that it very much does something that almost no stories do nowadays. It very much respected what came before, in contrast to Tron Ares, which in a typical fashion now basically gave whole middle finger to what came before, but Tron Legacy back in the day obviously very much respected what came before. So yes, ultimately I think that Tron Legacy is a quite good sequel and very entertaining movie, and I ultimately quite enjoyed myself as I was watching it, but it's not as great as I remember it watching it back as a teenager, back in 2010. But it's certainly much better to Tron Ares. So if you have a bad taste in your mouth after Tron Ares, then I suggest you either watch the original Tron from the 80s or Tron Legacy. Either one is a pretty good choice. But then I also remember there was this show, Tron Uprising, which was a quite good show, and probably much better actually from either Tron Legacy and certainly Tron Ares, but sadly it ended on a cliffhanger and was discontinued. What a shame, because Tron Uprising now, that was some good Tron stuff actually, but overall, again, Tron Legacy is a quite good, entertaining movie and a pretty good sequel, but it's not as great as I remember it. So, guys, thank you for checking out this video. Press the like button, please subscribe to this channel, and I will talk to you soon in another video. Talk to you then, bye!